7:38, Nashville's morning news on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Want to get right to the Newsmaker Hotline. Welcome in from the Heritage Foundation National Security Analyst. Daniel Flesch is with us. Daniel, thank you very much for being here. Alarming, the story the FBI has now confirmed that there were some documents, U.S. intelligence documents that were leaked, and basically they were leaked and the information was pertaining to Israel attacking inside of Iran. So I guess, first of all, my big question is, what was in these documents and how big of a blow, if any, is this to Israel?
Yes, well, good morning, Dan. Thank you for having me here. So these documents purport to show some of Israel's options in responding to Iran's attack from October 1st. If you recall, that was its second direct attack with ballistic missiles on Israel. And so these documents purport to show options that Israel is considering exercising in its response. It's unclear, first off, if those are all of the options, but certainly there are some of them. It's a big blow on a number of levels. One is certainly trust between the U.S. and Israel, which is, I would argue, at perhaps an all-time low right now. How can Israel trust the U.S. government not to leak intentionally or otherwise sensitive information about its battle plans, not only against Iran, but against Hamas, Hezbollah, and the other enemies in the region? In addition, certainly operational security for Israel in its response. And finally, I'd say let's look inward. There is a significant Iranian influence operation inside our government that we need to take much more seriously than we have been. And so this leak shows a number of different exposures that we have in the United States.
There was along those lines, and you're going to have to fill in the pieces here, Daniel, but the FBI right now, aren't they investigating the Biden administration's special envoy to Iran? I think the guy's name is Robert Malley, over allegations that he was improperly handling secret information as well, potentially, according to the Wall Street Journal, moving classified materials to a personal email account. He's now on unpaid leave. But, that kind of plays into what you just said, where I guess it's kind of a head scratcher. What's going on over there in the Biden administration?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So Robert Malley was the Biden special envoy for Iran because the Biden administration wanted to restart the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, and negotiations were ongoing for most of the administration up until about a year and a half ago. And Robert Malley was the point person on that. And it's unclear exactly what happened. All we know from public reporting is that sometime early last year, his security clearance was revoked, and then he was placed on administrative leave. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's teaching at Princeton now or somewhere. But it shows that, again, the coziness with which this administration has with the Iranians is really suspect. And beyond that, there's been other investigations into other senior individuals in the Defense Department who are part of an Iranian study group that have close ties with the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, essentially the regime's innermost military operations. So it's not just Robert Malley, it's not just one or two bad apples, it's an overall trend of the individuals in this administration, and a lot of these people were part of the Obama administration as well. They're kind of holdovers from that, because this line of thinking that Iran should be a normal member of the community of nations, you find sympathizers within the government, and then it's unclear if these individuals leaked the information. The FBI is looking into that. But again, even if they did not, the fact is that we have Iran sympathizers at the highest levels of Defense Department and state.
Well, it's no secret that it seems like Biden has been enabling Iran through the ignored sanctions and all of the things that they've done to allow Iran to sell oil to China. Therefore, Iran has all of this money to fund terrorism around the world. Of course, Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthi rebels. This is something that really is consistent with what seems like the Biden administration's foreign policy. We also know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they've not always been sort of unequivocal in their support of Israel, and they're defending themselves against future terrorist attacks. So that is all kind of consistent with this mindset that you're talking about.
Absolutely. The administration has kind of had a Jekyll and Hyde approach to Israel. Oftentimes they've said that they'll always say we Our support for Israel's right to exist is steadfast and ironclad, et cetera, et cetera. That's all well and good, but when the chips are down, what are you doing in terms of not only negotiating, putting pressure on Israel against Hamas, for example, for a potential ceasefire to return hostages? What are you doing in terms of withholding arms to Israel? What are you doing with, as Biden said back in April when Iran launched its first attack against Israel, for Israel not to respond to quote unquote take the win? So all these things have amounted to a pressure campaign against our ally in the Middle East as it fights for a war of survival against multiple enemies, the leader of which is Iran. And at the end of the day, Israel and this administration have had two diverging goals in this war. For Israel, understandably, it's victory, because anything short of victory could mean actually existential defeat. For this administration, the goal has been quiet. They want quiet ahead of the elections, which now we're obviously 2 weeks away. They want quiet so as not to disrupt anyone on their left flank, which they can't appease anybody. But they've had two different goals, and we see that with the administration now putting pressure on our ally, and always forgetting, it seems, that there are still Americans being held hostage in Gaza. So it's not like we are an impartial observer to this war. We should absolutely 100% be on the side of the Israelis and demonstrating that not with our political support, but also our military support.
Seems like, Daniel, every couple of days, Israel has taken out another terror leader in the news today. CNN reporting possible Hezbollah successor has been killed, according to the Israeli military. Daniel Flesch is joining us, national security analyst for the Heritage Foundation, and talking about Israel and these leaked documents. A little bit further in this conversation, headline this morning, Peter, possible Hezbollah successor, Hashim Salfadin, killed, Israeli military says. And Daniel, so I've got to ask, every couple of days, it seems like we're taking out a terror leader from either Hamas or Hezbollah, but it seems like they don't run out of these guys. And so at what point is Israel able to somehow declare total victory? I mean, is that even possible at this point?
We're nearing that point. I mean, certainly these organizations have political and military hierarchies, so Israel's been trying to, and successfully, degrading them over the last number of months. And we've had a string of successes. The leaders of Hezbollah and Hamas have been taken out, something that was really inconceivable a year ago, in the early days of the October 7th wars, and even before. These guys were seen as almost untouchable, and at the end of the day, they can be replaced. Now, there's not a one-to-one replacement with individuals who can take their place and still command forces in the field or command the political hierarchies as effectively as Nasrallah did with Hezbollah. He was the leader for 32 years. As Yahya Sinwar did for Hamas, he obviously was a mastermind of the October 7th attack and a lot of gravitas and status. But at the end of the day, these organizations can replace them. But if you really want to, as you mentioned, declare total victory, the threat is not from Hezbollah and Hamas. Certainly there's been wars there, but it's really from Iran. Because so long as Iran is there to help refund, resupply, retrain, and rearm Hezbollah and Hamas, then these organizations will just crop up again. And if not them, then another organization in a different iteration. So while it's very important for Israel to defeat Hamas, which it's on its way to doing, to defeat Hezbollah, we can't forget that 80,000 Israelis have been displaced from their homes in the north due to the war since October 8th. But the real war is against Iran. The proxies are just the tactical fronts, but Iran is really the strategic enemy.
I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record, but the obvious answer here is, and I know you can't talk politically, but seems to me like the obvious answer here is a new president comes into office, Donald Trump, who does what he did before and really crushes Iran's economy so that they simply don't have the money to fund all of this terrorism. Is it just that simple? There's got to be more.
Well, in many ways, it starts with that. If you look at the cash reserves that the Iranian regime had on hand at the end of the Trump administration, it was something around $6 billion, which is the amount that the country the size of Haiti would have. And then on October 6th or October 7th, I think Iran had something on the order of $70 billion in cash reserves. So with all this cash, what is it doing? Certainly the threat from Iran is multifold. It's the pursuit of nuclear weapons. It is the ballistic missiles, as we've seen. But also, as we're talking about, it is its proxy organizations around the region. And how does it support them? With cash. So at some point, you need to cut off the cash supply from the Iranians, not only with not allowing them to access the international market, but also to sell oil, to impose sanctions on them, to make them to hit them where it hurts the most. And if we're not going to do that, then the Iranian regime knows that they can outlast any administration and just wait for the next one.
One of the things that, last question here, and Daniel, great conversation. You got the Democrats out there that are screaming about Donald Trump. He pulled out of the Iranian nuclear deal, and now they're saying that Iran is ever so closer to a nuclear bomb. Remind us, there is very specific reasons why Trump pulled out of the deal, the least of which was that he said, and many others said, that Iran simply wasn't sticking to the deal.
Yeah, there were two fundamental flaws in the nuclear deal. One was the belief, the erroneous belief that Iran, as I mentioned earlier, wanted to become a quote-unquote good standing member of the community of nations. Yeah. It does not want that. That's not its goals. That's not the regime's goals at all. It might be the Iranian people's goals, and we could distinguish them from the regime, but it's not the regime's goals. That's number one. And number two was that the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, it would eventually sunset about after 10 years or 12 years, depending on different clauses, which means the Iranians just have to wait out a few administrations, wait out the 10 to 15-year timeline, and then they could sprint towards a bomb. So it was not a binding agreement that would be long-lasting. It actually had a shelf life. So those two things showed that it was actually a disastrous deal, in addition to other considerations as well.
Well, if I may, real quick,
yeah.
One of the other problems was that they were using, the lifted sanctions to buy more conventional weapons, and they were consistently threatening Israel.
Right. So this is the other element as well, is that the Iran nuclear agreement just focused on, understandably, the Iran nuclear program. But the threat from Iran was not just the nuclear program. It's also its military capabilities and its funding of proxies. So it was flush with cash, able to support Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, and other organizations. So the agreement just focused on one aspect of the Iranian threat, even though the Iranian threat is multifold. And so it wasn't, a few weeks ago, or actually I think sometime in September, Blinken mentioned at the Aspen Security Forum that Iran is now a few weeks away from sprinting towards a nuclear weapon. That wasn't the case under President Trump, and that's the case now. So that's a pretty stark reminder of different policies, what they yield.
All right, great conversation. Daniel Flesch from the Heritage Foundation.